Today we're going to talk about the holographic human transformation theory, worldview, and self-view, and the way we process information. So we've kind of discussed briefly the personality profiles. There's 6 different personality profiles. We have idealist and conceptualist, actionist and relationalist, and functionist and strategist. Idealist and conceptualist are exact opposites of each other. Actionist and relationalist are exact opposites of each other. And functionists and strategists are exact opposite of each other. So our first 3 senses fired create our worldview. It's the way we meet and greet the world. And our last 3 senses fired are the way we meet and greet ourselves. So each personality profile has reference senses, their first and fourth, that create their reference senses. Those are the mainframe of what we reference to make our decisions. And the next sense, our second and fifth, are our decision senses. Our third and sixth create our motivator senses. So we have reference, decisions, and motivator senses for our world and our self-view. And the first 3 senses fired, our worldview, creates our feedback for our self-view to grow. It will naturally draw these things out to help us overcome our limiting beliefs and what we could use to help us grow and basically overcome ourselves. So an idealist and conceptualist are exact opposites. An idealist firing order starts with the sense of sound, primary question being what? This is a reference sense for them. It creates values, ethics, and meanings for them. And then they move on to the sense of touch, primary question who? This is a decision sense for them. And this creates relationships and the way things relate for them. Their third sense fired, being a motivator sense, is taste, primary question being how, and this is what they use to process beliefs about character and their processes. And then they will bifurcate and cross over into their self-view that starts their 4th sense fired. And for an idealist, their 4th sense fired is the sense of sight, primary question being why. This is a reference sense for their self-view, and this creates their ideas, reasons, and concepts. Their 5th sense fired is a sense of smell, primary question being where. This is a decision sense for idealists, and this creates their strategies and beliefs about how things work. Their 6th sense being fired, primary question being which, is a sense of energy and intuition. This is a motivator sense, the self-view motivator for an idealist, and this will create actions and intuitions. So their exact opposite is a conceptualist. A conceptualist, their first reference sense is the sense of sight, primary question being why. And this, they're referencing ideas, reasons, and concepts. Their second sense fired is the sense of smell, primary question being where. And this is a decision sense for them. And this creates their strategies and their beliefs about how things work. Their third sense fire is energy, primary question being which. This is a motivator sense for them, and this creates their actions and intuitions. 4th sense fired for them. This is their crossover point where they switch from worldview into self-view. This is a sense of sound for them. Primary question being what? It's a reference sense. So this creates their values, ethics, and meanings. Their 5th sense fired is the sense of touch. Primary question being who? This is a decision sense for conceptualists. This creates their relationships and the way things relate. Their 6th sense fired is taste, primary question being how. This is a motivator sense for a conceptualist, and this creates their beliefs about character and processes. So these being exact opposites, idealists and conceptualists, they will naturally be drawn to each other, because if they're blocked in one of those senses, their exact opposite firing order is going to fill in for that. So it becomes a subconscious process that we're not even consciously aware of. We're naturally drawn to these people in our lives because they will help us process that information, and it naturally draws a connection to where we don't have to fire through successfully.
Right. When I realized this, as I was learning this material, and I realized that on a subconscious level, your subconscious will naturally seek out that which it's lacking in its sensory firing order. Can I talk about me as an actionist for a second? And she'll go into this in just a second, but me as an actionist, my exact opposite is a relationist. My actionist firing order is which, why, where, who, how, what. And a relationalist firing order is who, how, what, which, why, where. And so my worldview is my first 3 senses fired, which, why, where. My self-view is my last 3 senses fired, who, how, what. And as a relationalist, their worldview is their first 3 senses fired, who, how, what. And as and their last three senses fired are their self view, which, why, where.
Well, it's opposites attract, because worldview and self-view, their worldview creates your self-view, and your self-view creates their worldview,
Yeah.
and it switches. And still, it doesn't even have to be with your exact opposite. Usually we get drawn to people, and it becomes a more natural thing for your opposite because you're firing oppositely.
Right.
And you're naturally going to nurture each other because their worldview creates your self-view, and vice versa. And still, that's the reason it tend to be like actionists, and actionists can sometimes bump heads because of the way they process information, new things. You can naturally butt heads where you're going to get nurtured more by a relationist because they're tending to relate to your true self, your self-view, and what's going on. So you get drawn into them. And still, it could be any of your senses that are blocked. You're naturally going to tend to someone that's not blocked in that sense, so they can complete your firing and give you information that you don't have conscious access to at this time because it's blocked through these senses. And this is the reason it creates codependency in our lives. We're counting on someone else to fulfill something inside of us that we're not able to at that time. So when someone's able to complete a firing order or process something in a sense we're not able to, it naturally tends to make us feel whole.
Right, and as human beings, we are whole systems. From the beginning, we are a whole system. We've talked in other videos about, several different systems going on within us, and each one of these senses is a system in and of itself. And throughout our life's experience, we become blocked off in those senses through conscious choice and the situations that have happened and our conscious response to them. We've said that we don't want to experience that, or we don't want to feel that anymore, or that's painful, ouch, don't, And this has created sensory blocks in our firing order. And what we're talking about here is that for our system is going to seek wholeness. It's going to seek wholeness in anything and everything that it does. And so as we're blocked off in these senses, we're naturally going to seek out other people that are open in those senses that we're talking about. And that's a really interesting concept to wrap your mind around if you haven't heard this information before. It's really cool.
Relationalists and actionists are exact opposites. Relationalist firing order, first sense fired, is a sense of touch, primary question being who. This is a reference sense for them, and this creates their relationships and the way things relate to one another. Second sense fired is the sense of taste, primary question being how. This is a decision sense for them, and this is where they process beliefs about character. Their third sense fired is sound, primary question being what. This is a worldview motivator for them, and they're processing values, ethics, and meaning. Fourth sense fired, which is their crossover from where they switch to worldview to self-view. Their fourth sense fired is energy, primary question being which. This is a reference sense for them, for their self-view, and they're processing actions and intuitions. Their fifth sense fired being the sense of sight, primary question being why. This is a decision sense for them, and they're processing ideas, reasons, and concepts. Their sixth sense fired is the sense of smell, primary question being where, and they're processing strategies or beliefs about how things work. And then going into actionists, they're going to be the complete opposite firing order. So actionist firing order, their first sense fired is a sense of energy, primary question being which. This is a reference sense for an actionist, and they're processing actions and intuitions. Their second sense fired is a sense of sight, primary question being why, and they're processing ideas, reasons, and concepts. This is a decision sense for actionists in their worldview. Third sense fired being smell, primary question being where. This is a motivator sense for them, and they're processing strategies or beliefs about how things work. And then they'll cross over until they're into their self-view. Their fourth sense fired is a sense of touch. This is a reference sense for their self-view for an actionist, and they're processing relationships or the way things relate. Their fifth sense fired being the sense of taste, primary question being how. This is a decision sense for the self-view for an actionist, and they're processing beliefs about character and processes. Their sixth sense fired being sound, primary question being what. This is their self-view motivator, and they're processing values, ethics, and meaning.
One thing I'd like to point out as you read that is something I've heard before that says our true self is our opposite firing order, right? And we say our true selves, it's who we're truly meant to be. And as an actionist, we've read our personality profiles on a previous video, but a relationist is somebody who's nurturing and relates well to others, and that's who I'm truly meant to be. And as I've went through, a change process here at the treatment center I was in, I found out that as I started to change the way that I viewed the world, I started to relate better within myself, and that has brought out some really redeeming qualities within me that I can relate to as a relationalist in the relationalist profile. I think when I first got here, it was when I read the relationalist profile, it was kind of from a sense of longing, or maybe wishing I was exuding more of those qualities, and each profile has their negatives and their positives, but the positives in the relationalist was more of a sense of longing to me. And as I progressed through this material, that I was starting to exude more of a nurturing personality type, and coming from a more loving perspective, and I feel like that's more of a relationalist profile. So it's been interesting.